All right, motivator, let's get into this fifth concept of the complete strength training guide for endurance athletes. That being, what exercises should you really be focusing on? Remember when I said before that traditional strength training applied to endurance training plans really just doesn't work. You have to have endurance sport specific strength training. The exercises that you choose to do and the exercises that you choose not to do is going to make a big difference in whether or not you see a big performance increase from including strength training into your plan. Get it right, and you're going to see a bunch of improvement. Get the exercise wrong, you're going to spend a lot of time throwing around weight and not seeing a big improvement. So let's talk about the main exercises that you want to focus on to reduce injury, to improve economy, and increase the likelihood that you are going to age well and perform well in your races.
My name is Taren. In my late 20s, I was overweight, unfulfilled, and couldn't even run to the end of the block. Over the following 10 years, I lost 65 pounds racing triathlons, running races, cycling events, and world championships. But eventually, the suffer culture of endurance sports training caught up to me, causing health issues and injuries. Now, my company Motive and I are on a mission to help people live more fulfilling lives by reaching endurance sports goals using healthy methods. We can all kill it on race day without killing our bodies. Let's do it.
So let's start diving into what the best exercises are for strength training for endurance athletes. And the way that I approach this is, what are the most common injuries and imbalances that endurance athletes have? And then let's start reverse engineering. How do we make those imbalances balanced? How do we make the tightnesses loose? And how do we make the body nice and stable without having weak areas? So studies have shown that the most common injuries for endurance athletes are in the feet, things like plantar fasciitis, in the lower legs, so things like Achilles issues or shin splints, runner's knee, pain in the outside of the knee, often caused by tight IT bands and tight glutes. Then pain in the lower back is really common. And then for swimmers and triathletes, pain in the shoulders is also really common. There have been a couple different times that I've had injuries. The two most significant ones were in my right shoulder as I was preparing for a 27-kilometer marathon swim, and then Achilles on the left side as I was training for half Ironmans. The really interesting thing about these two injuries is that both times that I went to a physiotherapist to deal with it, the physiotherapist prescribed the same exercises to fix it, being strengthening the stabilizer muscles in the core. The reason for that is when your stabilizer muscles are off and you're performing 10,000 strokes in a swim workout or 15,000 steps in a long run or 100,000 rotations in the course of a week on a bike that are all in the same repetitive motion, if your body isn't really stable and very solid and there's no wobbling whatsoever, you are likely going to develop injuries because your body just can't sustain that amount of force when it's done over and over and over. It's called repetitive use injuries. It's the same reason that hands and wrists end up getting injured from people who are just sitting and typing. When you're doing something over and over repeatedly, it's hard for your body to actually stabilize itself. So that's why I think that the very best exercises for endurance athletes are stability focused, are stabilizing focused. Things like the glute med in the side of the bump, things like the side of your core, twisting movements. But really, it's making sure that the outside of your ankle all the way up to the outside of your shoulder can be one strong chain. It can all work together. And the only way that you do that is with compound movements. So compound movements are multi-joint movements. This is like the difference between a bicep curl, which is one joint, just your elbow, and a deadlift, which is a lot of joints. That's your ankle, your knee, your hips, your shoulders. Compound movements are forcing more muscle groups to activate, and it's forcing your body to work together as a whole, because I'm sorry, it really does work together as a whole. Everything is tied together. And by focusing on one aspect, like I see people that want to improve their hamstring strength so that they can run better, and then they go and do hamstring curls. But it's not teaching those hamstrings to work with any other muscle group, and then you go out and run when the hamstrings need to work with other muscle groups. So the idea of isolated movements that aren't compound, I really just don't get. Unless you have a very specific imbalance that has been completely diagnosed as that muscle group needs extra work, you really should be focusing on stability movements, compound movements. Personally, I really like dynamic stability movements. So for example, doing a kettlebell snatch. Kettlebell snatch is where the kettlebell starts in between your legs, it's swung out in front of you, up over your head, and then locked overhead. If you can even change that to starting across your body, swinging it across in front of your body, and then up and twisting with a lighter kettlebell, this is going to make your feet fire. They're gonna grab the ground. Your ankles are all going to have to be mobile. Your hips are going to have to move. Your stabilizer muscles in the glute and the side of the core and the obliques are all going to be activated, and the shoulder is going to activate. It's still a snatch, but it is so much more dynamic and so much more applicable to real life. Being running, cycling, swimming, taking your garbage out, taking your groceries out of the car, catching a kid that's running at you, lifting somebody up. Your body always has to work dynamically. It's not in a controlled scenario almost ever until you put it in a controlled scenario with traditional strength training. So we really like dynamic movements. The unfortunate part about that is that this section becomes really hard to actually explain, because if you're listening to this, you're not going to understand me talking about it. If I am showing you in the YouTube video, I can show you a couple of exercises, but really it's taking all exercises and putting a spin on it so that you're feeling unstable, so that you are able to put out a lot of weight while being a little bit challenged to have to create your stability and a strong, stable platform. That's one of the big reasons that I like kettlebells. If we look at a dumbbell and holding a dumbbell, the center of mass in that dumbbell is right smack in the center of your hand. So if you hold that up in front of your chin, there's no wobbling, there's no pulling one way or another, it's right in the middle of your hand and it's well balanced. A kettlebell, on the other hand, it has a center of mass that is away from where you're actually grabbing it. So just by holding a kettlebell up, it's pulling you off center, and instantly all of your stabilizer muscles have to activate to stabilize yourself. That's why I really like kettlebells, because just by the very design of the weight, you are having to stabilize yourself and activate all of your core dynamic movements. It's very, very practical. It's like how weights are designed like groceries. You're carrying it in a handle and the weight is somewhere else. You are catching somebody who's running at you, you are holding them in a certain area, and the weight is continuing in the direction they're running. This is practical movement, so this is why I really like kettlebells. I won't just leave you hanging and say, well, just buy kettlebells. Some of the recommendations that I will give you specifically for the areas that we're talking about, the feet and lower legs, do your exercises barefoot so that your toes and your feet have to activate. Use a wobble board and just Google wobble board, get it, and do some wobble board movements to make your foot and your ankle function really well. Do that a few times a week. Do lateral stability kind of movements where you're not just planted on the ground, but you're planted on the ground and you're having to either stop yourself from moving side to side, or you're moving side to side and your body is having to plant itself and stop it from being tipped over. I want you to work on quads, hamstrings, and glutes, but do it in ways that the body has to work together. So I like squats and different variations of squats. A really good example is squat where you're holding a kettlebell in one hand, so it's pulling you off center, And that squat is going to activate your core, so you have to stabilize yourself and stay nice and upright, but then doing the squat, it activates your quads, your glutes, and your hips. It's just an easy way to take a very simple movement and all of a sudden make it very endurance sport specific. And finally, the way to activate your core is typically not by doing specific core movements, it's by doing a lot of twisting and stability movements. Movements that send you off axis and force you to activate that core really stably and carry some weight and even twist while you're doing it. That's how you're going to create that connection to the core into all of your limbs. So I know that it's not a perfect answer of how do you do it, but anyone that's giving you a perfect straightforward answer of do these movements is actually giving you an incomplete answer. We have done the 5 best movements for runners or cyclists, kettlebell workouts in this YouTube channel. But as I finish those workouts, I go, that's really just 5 workouts of 60 that I could possibly give, because it's not giving people the full picture. I'm giving people a fish instead of teaching them how to fish. I will put a plug in for our app at mymotive.com. We actually have 25 hours of guided kettlebell workouts that you can follow along. And as you go through these, they're designed specifically for endurance athletes to alleviate the issues of feet injuries, lower leg injuries, runner's knee, lower back, shoulder injuries. And as you start doing them, you start understanding how we take movements and make them very endurance sport specific. But if you don't want to use our app for your endurance training, you just want the strength training, you can go to mymotive.com and you can buy just our 25 hours of guided kettlebell strength routines. And we do give guidance on how you can insert them in the training plan best for you. All right, Motivator, thank you for watching this clip of the best exercises to do within our complete guide to strength training for endurance athletes. If you want the full video talking about all these concepts, it is linked up here. In that full video, we talk about this pie chart and what it means in relation to your endurance training plan. If you don't want to watch that full video, you can see all of the clips with all of these 7 individual concepts linked in this playlist right over here. And if you aren't already subscribed, hit the subscribe button below. Later, Motivators.